Hi, my name is Benedict. This video today is actually going to be about electronic body music, or EBM. Another common name is industrial dance, or as it was in my time, at least where I was mostly commonly known as EBM slash industrial, because the two are actually slightly different streams, but there was a convergence, especially with the Americans. Now I'm working with my better microphone today, my pro microphone, but I do have the fan on, so it's possible it could get noisy, but without the fan in Australia at this time of year, impossible to work. And I really wasn't enjoying having that little thing, because the sound quality was just ugh. So electronic body music, I will, after some introduction and talk about why this form is important, show you very quickly the basics of how it works. Obviously, if you hadn't already realized, I recently released a refill called Thortfulness, which is everything done in Thor, hence the Thor thing, but the sounds were really optimized for EBM in its pure original form. These days it tends to sound more like EDM, electronic dance music, and the two, while there's a relationship, should not be considered as being the same things. We'll discuss that as we go a little bit through the history. But this gives those people who are a little confused about, well, why are these sounds this way? What should I be doing with it? Well, do whatever the hell you want to do, because it's your pack now that you bought it. But this is the thinking behind it, and some of the history behind this, and why the form's actually really important. A friend suggested I do this because, despite the fact that I've been sending him EBM stuff for quite some time, saying, understand what this track does really well, he didn't really get it until working on something where I basically delivered a lyric that he had, and built the music around it, and the way that he created his lyric, whether he realized it or not, was actually EBM. So I built the music underneath it in that form, and then suddenly he's going, oh, now I kind of get it. So electronic body music, it really appeared in the early 80s, kind of didn't really rise above, but then suddenly in the mid 80s it started to really get a presence. By the late 80s it was actually being consumed, subsumed, and turned into something else. Two different paths really happened as a result of it. In the very early days, but going to about 1980, nobody's really sure, everyone makes their own claims, and I'm not claiming to be perfect, but merely to give you a primer on what is electronic body music. It was predominantly out of Germany and Belgium, of all places. Little Belgium. A lot of the acts actually came out of Belgium, and a lot of the acts were signed to a Belgian record label, Play It Again Sam, and then sent off to Antler and Network in Canada, where there was quite a lot happening in and around that space. These guys were hearing what had been happening with Kraftwerk, We Are the Robots, and also the Berlin School, so the Tangerine Dream style of music, which was a lot more, to the modern mind, new age, but was really quite out there and contained a lot of what became the signature of Berlin School, this really rigid sequencing. So not machine gun sequencing, but very rigid sequences. Within Berlin School, which I'm adherent of, there was often soloing, which was freeform on top of that. So you got the contrast between the two. But these young people were coming up in the time of punk, or really more post-punk, because true punk is the Clash, Sex Pistols, is pretty narrow. But post-punk was actually happening before punk. It was just called art rock then. But bands like Magazine and Wire, who were doing really interesting things, who were looking to say, we can use the form of rock and go to other places with it. So they were combining rock with cabaret. They were combining rock with noise. So true industrial at that point had been acts like Throbbing Gristle, who went on stage and were just more out there than any punk band. The Pistols sounded like the Spice Girls compared to Throbbing Gristle, who were on stage with bandsaws and hammers and all kinds of messed upness. That form continued to some extent through acts like Einstürzende Neubauten, who merged the noise with EBM and a real Nick Cave kind of a sensibility as well. I saw them once, full on, loudest show ever. But EBM, these guys started by taking some of the elements of the Germanic style that they were hearing, as I said, Tangerine Dream and Kraftwerk, particularly Kraftwerk, because it was more mechanical. But there was a beauty to it, a beauty in the mechanics, particularly of Kraftwerk. And they were aware of what was happening with the art school, the post-punk stuff, but of course they were very aware of disco. They were dancing to disco and Eurobeat, which was starting to become its own form, and they wanted to take their own frustrations, their own things that they wanted to say, and put it in a new form. So suddenly you had acts starting to appear. There were some outliers like Suicide, but really within the Northern European scene, we had acts like Neon Judgment, who were starting to put out tapes that were uncompromising, yet compared to what, say, the metal guys like Venom were doing, was very, very different. It didn't sound like disco, but it was drum machines and these really quite tiny sounds, but over the top, there was a very tortured vocal. Not tortured in that what became later the sort of emo style, oh no, my poor teddy bear, and all that kind of boo-hoo crap that we got with new metal. But it was a very driven kind of delivery, which they were getting from, again, bands like Throbbing Gristle, who were shouting at their microphones, or, of course, the Alien Sex Fiend and bands like that, who were starting to actually sing lower in their throats. So they were turning their tenors into baritones, the most famous of those being Andrew Eldritch of Sisters of Mercy. Hey now, now. Yeah, pushing right down to get a more resonant, deeper kind of sound. So the EBM guys were doing that. One of my favourite lyrics out of the early EBM is this. A band called Split Second, who were fairly successful within that scene, but not really known outside. And I'm not a great singer. I used to make a form of EBM myself as Aeroplastic Voice, but I was never a great singer. But let's have a bit of a go at this. Ripping skin and crushing bones, head-on collision of shallow treat bones. Feel the beat creep into your bones, the putrefaction of another night alone. Break down in a fractured smile, bite the carpet, bite the dust, crawl through shit on the brink of lust. Bend my body armor, bend my body armor, bend my body armor, tear it apart. That kind of style of delivery. Obviously, I've edited some of the vocals because I can't remember how those lines go. But lyrically, they were looking at things that were quite outside of what other people were doing. Even metal wasn't doing stuff like that. EBM was presenting things which, not as full-on as SPK, who did all manner of interesting things on stage, but definitely showed a way for what started to happen later. The people who brought that into the mainstream were Ministry, Nine Inch Nails, or maybe the other way around, Nine Inch Nails, Ministry. It's hard to say really who started to get close. Of course, the other American act was a Revolting Cocks, who honestly I was never into. But the sound started to coalesce, and it was that combination of really intense lyrics, sometimes quite simple in their form, with these tiny drum machine sounds, but overall delivering a feel that, to me, still far exceeds in terms of intensity what all these supposedly really full-on extreme metal bands are doing. To me, Slipknot is just like, yeah, it's a bunch of cartoony boys doing cartoony stuff, whereas the earlier EBM acts were really well, like there to rip your guts out. And while it's an incredibly limited form, they were limited in what they did. You know, they didn't expand themselves tremendously. It was powerful. The guys who really started to go over the top with that, well, the first would have been DAF, with De Mussolini, which was actually managing to get into disco floors. Not ABBA floors, but it was managing to get into disco floors. Front 242. They released an EP called No Comment, and it's one of my favourite records to this day. It's just stunning. It's out there. It's intense and powerful. It was a lovely day, the day you walked away. It's kind of Human League, but where the Human League were very British. These guys were very Teutonic. There was this feel of them trying to exorcise the past of a dictatorial Europe. I don't want to say the N word. They were trying to exorcise that from themselves and delivering this really rigid kind of approach, whilst often having to make up some of their technology as they went. So they took where Kraftwerk was prone to being beautiful, and they would write tracks which were really very lovely, you know, nice little melodies. The EBM guys were using melody. They didn't eschew it. That didn't come till techno later, and then techno was like, ew, melody. And so we had a bit of an explosion then as Front 242, especially with Headhunter. 1, you lock the target. 2, you count the lines, or whatever the lyric is. That one actually got on dance floors and in America as well. And Skinny Puppy, the upcoming Canadian act, fired back with Assimilate, which, as my friend came back, and he was just like, I don't know what to make of that. Skinny Puppy was so out there. There was no other act like Skinny Puppy, with the possible exception of some of the spin-offs that they did, like Hilt. They took noise and use of samples in ways that I have never heard anyone do since. People go on about, oh, Liam of the Prodigy is so great with samples. No, he's really got no idea what he's doing compared to Skinny Puppy. It's not easy to get into, but start with something like, well, maybe Assimilate, the 12-inch mix, but something like Vivisect or 666 Sect, the album. It is amazing, the detail that they got out of their collage. That was not technically EBM, it was a bit more industrial, but they were marrying the two. Out of Australia, we had several acts come out of Australia. Severed Heads managed to go to the top of the dance charts with Dead Eyes Opened. A lot of his stuff wasn't as dancey, but this working with tapes and drum machines on tape that he played the tape backwards and all kinds of things like that. I actually exchanged some conversation with Tom Ellard a couple of times, kooky fellow. And then later, out of Australia, the ever bizarre Jim Thirlwell, he took his form of EBM under the name of Fetus into a very bizarre area. He took, again, some of the things that some of the other acts had been doing with playing with ideas like vaudeville, and he took this sort of vaudeville sense of rockabilly and made this record. The album that I specifically think of is called Nail, starts with Theme from Pigdom Come, and it is just stunning in the audacity of it. It makes the KLF, who are very bombastic, sound incredibly safe. But a lot of those guys who came after were listening to these records as being, you know, just like the Pistols were listening to the Ramones and going, how do we do that? A lot of these later acts were listening to these EBM records, which is why they're important. So Cassandra Complex showed you Split Second. In Sotto Voce, I loved In Sotto Voce. There's an album called Tracks, which is just amazing in its variety. There's rigid Teutonic sequencing, machine gun drums and sound effects, and then they actually get into metal. So they're fusing metal, which is probably one of the earlier points where they did it. But EBM acts expanded and they had to pull in different things. Some increasingly went techno, which was a shame because they saw where the market was going, but it killed what was happening. One of the later acts that started to come through was Agram, and they released a record which some reviewers were saying, this is the future of rock. They weren't thinking what was going to become Nirvana and all that kind of stuff. They said, this is it. And while it seemed like those reviewers were really wrong, they actually turned out to be very right. The Agram record was too complex for most people to get into, and neither of them were particularly pretty boys, so there wasn't a video appeal out of them either. But that idea of a fusion really grabbed people, and then of course bands like Nitzer Ebb did fairly well, and they had a crossover. I was dancing to it in underground nightclubs in Brisbane, Australia, so not exactly way out of the way, but Let Your Body Learn. Fast beat the feet, fast for the hands. It's really intense, and that was going on floors along with High Energy. So Hey Guy and Let Your Body Learn could be put together. The other possible one, if the DJ really had a good size set on him, was Zig Zig Sputnik's F111 or 21st Century Whoopee Boy. It was 21st Century is because there was that similarity. They were playing with the same things, but really out there. And then the Americans started to take over. A label called Wax Trax started picking up a lot of things, KMFDM and the like, and they took what had been happening, but being American, they tended to be less audacious, but more noisy, just more aggressive. And that became the form, and out of that came the themselves, and of course 9 Inch Nails. The first 9 Inch Nails that I was hearing was pretty Hate Machine and Head Like a Hole. Head Like a Hole, Black as Your Soul I was kind of like, oh, that's kind of interesting. But then I started hearing the other stuff, and it was like, that's really not interesting. Personal choice. Suddenly, every grunge kid was like, and just dying for Marilyn Manson to come along and be, well. And on the other side was techno. Techno, as you know it now, out of the Chicago and Detroit, but really largely the British guys doing their thing. They must have been listening to EBM as well. There's a track by Carolyn Snowy Red with a saxophone in it. Play that and play Guru Josh's Infinity and tell me that Guru Josh did not actually just basically try and clone the Snowy Red track. Snowy Red had been around for a few years. It was a redo of one of his tracks with the flute lady, the horn player, and it's a beautiful thing. When you listen to Guru Josh, it's like, oh, he retreaded that to put it in the charts. Good on him. It's cool work on both sides of that fence. I'm not having a go at anybody. But the techno came along and it simplified. It got rid of the sense of any melody. If you listen to Front 242, the earlier stuff, especially stuff of No Comment, like Lovely Day, Special Forces, then you will actually hear simple melodies. They're very simple. It can be 2 or 3 notes, but they carry a melodic sense to them along with the singing. And suddenly techno and all these other things that came after it, they said, we don't want any of that. I've spoken about it before. I saw it as an incredibly negative thing. And it became more just about, I will turn everything up and make it louder and louder and louder. And as I said before, we lost what was powerful about EBM, which was that ability to express very complex, very intense subjects, whether they be about politics. A lot of EBM records were made about fascism, made about what was happening in the Middle East, the tyranny that they were seeing there, recapitulate in their lifetimes, thinking, oh, well, we've done with it in Europe, and suddenly it's recapitulating in the Middle East. So quite a lot of records about that, myself included, because I was there making it during the Gulf War, sort of going, what's going to happen from this, you know? we're sending our soldiers out to be on the ground to be hit with poison gas. So I wrote a song about it from the perspective of a soldier sitting in the field, knowing that at any point he could be hit with a missile with poison gas in it. A thing that we outlawed and taken out of war. At the end of World War I, suddenly it was coming again out of the Middle East. EBM was a perfect platform in which we could talk about that without having to feel like we had to watch our P's and Q's quite as much as if we'd been strumming a hippie song, or playing a synth song, a lightweight synth song as a pop song. So it combined what became what Depeche Mode were doing. And Depeche Mode were very aware of EBM, listen to People Are People and hear them play with elements of EBM and go, ooh, look, we can do that too. We got a sampler. That got lost. And I think it's a real shame because techno as we have it right now wouldn't have existed quite the same without EBM. So if you're going to go and look at some of the things, because I will have put up pictures to show you some of what we're talking about. I can't play you things, and I deliberately haven't played you things because I don't want this video edited or canned by YouTube left, right, and centre. You can go find these things yourself. There are lots of genuine good EBM acts, and there are EBM acts happening today. If you're aware of my Thortfulness ReFill, FHTH, out of Ukraine, Slava of Vlad's Hill, behind the Great Gates of Kiev, has been doing some very nice stuff in the EBM space. German, I think, act and one, Dick Krups, however you pronounce it, they're still going. I don't love this stuff as EBM. I find it a bit thin on the ground, but this is still definitely EBM. So the form still exists. Let's show you roughly how you might make it. So, looking at my Thortfulness ReFill, lucky I've got one. We'll start with drum. Now, it appears to be a very drum-driven form. It actually isn't as much as you think it is. The drums are important, but it's not as drum-driven as you might think. We'll start with a nice, safe 4 on the floor. A lot of it was about mechanization. The drum sounds in the early days were very much 606 or less sounds, and very minimal. Don't feel like you can't do EBM without having huge sounds. That didn't come until later. This sound emulates roughly the Alessa's D4 sound, which became the staple of Front 2 Forte. They just used it on everything. The D4 was just on everything. And it was this rack unit with drums in it. It didn't become super popular outside of certain types of people. So, simple sound, but got quite a bit of work happening to make it with the reverb and compressing it back down a little bit. Up to you entirely how you make the sounds, but sounds are not particularly bass heavy. A couple of reasons. One, because you couldn't put it on tape, you couldn't put it on vinyl. That's one of the factors. The other factor was that being bass heavy just makes no sense. You waste a lot of energy. As an aside, I listened to a mix, someone sent me a mix, we want to promote this and make our bazillions on Spotify and what have you, and I had to go straight back to him and say, look buddy, promoting is not a factor for you right now, because despite the fact that you've got a really lovely piece of cover art, beautiful cover art, your mix is so messed up, it's unreleasable, it's unplayable, because no one's going to put this on radio anywhere, because the kick drum was like up here. The rest of the mix was down here. I'm adding sort of 1280 dB on my listening knob and still struggling to actually hear the material, but there was a huge kick drum, huge amounts of bass. Messed up. It means that you can't hear the material. So, back after the illustration to show you what you want to avoid doing. Keep your kicks in particular fairly bright. You'll notice this is really quite bright. That's important because you want to pull this through. It's not just an EBM thing, but it was common enough in EBM. It's bright in your face. Something that's bright, got lots of treble, gives the impression that it's very close to your ears, that you can hear all this little detail. Something that's bassy and dull, in the real world you only hear something that perceives to be that bassy from an extremely long way away. Thunder and lightning, that's so far away it's not even very, very frightening anymore. That's how you hear real in the real world, because if thunder's there, you hear this hard mid-range crack. You don't feel the bass because you've probably pooped yourself. It's bright. When thunder is very bassy, it's a long, long way away. So you want to give that feeling of up in your face, go bright. Avoid a lot of low end. It's a weird thing that rap does. I understand why they do it, but it's the wrong direction for most times if you're wanting things to seem. Okay, nice and simple. Terms. The bass line's often what really had a lot of things happen. I think this is the one. Yeah, it's this one, or is it this one? That will go with the other one. I think that's right. If I'm not happy with it, I'll change it. Now, the form used tended to be surprisingly simple, but they wanted to build tension. Now, modern music can build tension, but one of the problems is they never release it, which means you can't build it again, which means you put people on a plateau, and then there's nowhere for them to go, so it all dissipates because it's just become annoying. Whereas EBM bands, the ones that knew what they were doing, would know how to build and release tension. And that's what they became masters of, building and releasing tension. And one great way to start to build tension is to use minimal note movement. Let's just do this. Make sure we're still in a key. For the moment, we'll say that's C major. Let's listen to what we've got. I've gone with 8th notes. In techno, we go straight to 16th notes. So say you can't use them, but you will struggle to have the space that you need. And remember, defining space is what music's about. So you can define the space and choose how you do that. That's essentially relax, don't do it, where are you going to get to it? Trevor Horn had been hearing what those guys were doing. That's not to say that this is a unique form of bassline, but maybe we'll put that up. Very minimal indeed. So we can actually get rid of this first alteration here. Let's copy our drums across as well. So we've now given ourselves 8 bars. And we know that's going to be coming there. So let's have a go at altering this. Now I'm just seeing, I'm making this up as I go along, as any good musician should. So maybe this. perhaps we should just modulate the whole thing. Now that's actually too much movement in the end. There, that works. See how little we've got, but how much we've made. It's driving. We've got the kick and the bass working together, but we've got the one in the middle as well. So the bass in the middle there. You could actually choose to make all of those a little quieter. In the very early days, there was no velocity, so they were all the same. So you might handle those with compression. I'm just hearing far too much uncomfortableness from the reverb because of the cans, and it's annoying me. So that essentially is the heart of EBM. We probably want a snare, so let's put the matching snare in here. Now here's where you start to see some things be done differently. Let's push back to so C3. Let's expand this a little bit so that we can see our options. 4. Rather than putting it on the 2 and the 4, we want to do this differently. That's not even going to be on the 4. That's going to be on the 4.5. This one can go on the 4, and let's see what happens here. Get rid of that. Let's try putting it there. So where EDM would be, I'll just be honest, thoughtless, and put their snares on the 2 and the 4 every single time, nice and reliable, thoughtless, careless, we're all going to feel completely safe. EBM never entirely wanted us to feel safe. It wanted us to enjoy the music, but it wanted us to be challenged, to be out there. So this is not a formula. There's plenty on the 2 and the 4. But by putting it in unexpected places every time, we're developing a pattern and breaking it over and over and over and over again. If we put it in random places, it'll just be like, man, your snare drum has been drinking. This has a pattern, but the pattern moves. And that makes it interesting over and over again because we have such a limited palette that we're using in terms of but that snare is moving us around. In terms of what you will do after that is entirely your business. Some EBM has little to no extra parts in it. If you've got a stunning vocal, a vocalist who can really kind of rip at you, not somebody who's going, oh, I'm a bit afraid of the microphone, man, don't judge me, man, then we kind of won't get there. But if you've got somebody who, and listen to these acts that I've been talking about from 242, Neon Judgment, A Split Second, listen to that song sung properly. It's Sotto Voce didn't sing a lot, but the one on the sampler record, World of Electronic Body Music, everything happens in Sotto Voce. The way that's delivered is really nice. Sotto Voce is Italian for in a soft voice. So it was actually a very cool name for an act, as in like an under voice, which is completely different to what they delivered, but very cool indeed in terms of thoughtfulness. So we've got things that are very rigid and something that moves. If you put in a great vocal, surprising what we can get away with, which will often have sound effects that drive the mix along there as well. Nasty noises. Now, where is it? Of course, I named everything very strangely, as you may have seen. Let's try Ice Pick to the ear. There's nothing quite like one of those. Oh, yes. I think this is actually the circular saw in my demo. No, it's not. It might be this one. Oh, yes. No, lovely. Everybody wants a circular saw in their music. So that's where you would be looking at, well, how can I punctuate this? Yeah, making this up as I go. Now the stutter there is inelegant in terms of EBM. They wouldn't have done that. It's not to say they weren't stutter things, but that obvious, well, look, I'm going to stutter it because I heard a dubstep record, they just wouldn't have done it. It would have been considered inelegant. So that might work. We should look at what our notes are playing. Now that's playing a, because it's good to be in key. Not that we should think of the circular saw as being in key, but you know what? It makes a real impact. Don't like that. It can go. It's not working. So that's actually giving us some sense of melody. Not a lot, but it's given us some sense of melody, as well as some variety. So if we were to be copying this, we might be more like this. So we've got our that's very front 242. Could almost be stolen out of no comment. Now, let's go with a lead. Yep. Alright, wasn't where I was going to go. It's definitely not a lead, but you know what? It's going to do its job. So we will take these and delete. How do I hit the delete key? Let's expand these out. Again, just seeing what I'm going to get. Yeah, I don't love the rhythm in here. I don't think they match. But nonetheless, there is something usable in here. Now you'll notice that what I'm doing the second time around is actually different from what I did the first time around. The last thing that we want to do is be overly predictable. Now what happens with these? Oh, well that solves my rhythmic problem from before. See, rather than saying, well, this is what it should be, I'm going with, well, what does it want to be? Filling out, that's a sort of a guitar line we're filling out. But interestingly, we're not really doing much in the way of new notes, and nor do we need to. Alright, let's go with this. I'll put it here for now. We don't want them to be... I'm going to do two different colour reds. We'll live with that. Let's just see what notes we are using. So this is where harmony becomes quite important. We've got a D, so if we're in C, what goes nicely with D? Let's go with an A. Because the A will work with C and will work with D. And we're back to C. D, let's go with that. That's still the same. What we're getting is almost a pad, a fill sound. So back down to there, which is the A, so we can use our A again. And then it goes back to the B, up to C. Now we can be predictable and just do the whole thing that we did before and copy what was in here, but unwise. As I said before, you don't kind of want to do that too much, because EBM is about doing something interesting. Yes, the palette is limited, but it's about doing something that makes you stand out, rather than doing something that makes you exactly the same as everybody else, which seems to be the prevailing mindset of EDM. Go figure. Now, if we're going to climb out of this, how can we do that? I love a fifth move. Whether it's right or wrong, don't care, I love them. Something very grand about them. Okay, that's got stuck into a mono mode, so we will solve that by just taking... normally I'd use F8, but I have it off at the moment. Let's just take a tiny bit off. We'll just take a whole one of those off and do the same over here. Just easy. Works nicely, actually. we've gone to a different note. And we know for a fact that B and F go together very nicely. That's your devil's triad. So lots of lovely tension in there. Now notice that rather than putting this repetition here or here to make it nice and tidy, I've actually put it in a slightly different spot. We've got the same note movement, but it's in a different place, just as my snares happened in different places. And now we need to come home, and it's probably going to be this. Works quite nicely, so no reason why we can't press Control and drag that out. See how we're now starting to have quite a bit of material. That's kind of, yeah, what if we lift it by, let's just glue them together. What if we lift them by an octave? Doesn't necessarily mean that we've got the right sound here at all. That's not nicer. The leap up here, though, isn't as good. So what if we try this? No. And the thing that people will think, oh, you'd never do that in EBM, but it's commonly used and very powerful when done nicely, is beautiful sounds. Well, say we're happy enough with that. It's showing you the idea. It's not intended to be a great track, because I'm making this up as I go, which means that I don't have time to think carefully about, am I going in the right direction? Let's put ourselves against that bass line just so we can be sure what we've got. And okay, well, I'm not hearing this. That tells me what I'm going to get when I play it back with a sequence. I don't get the thing that I think I'm going to get at all. So let's try a different sound. There's probably a reason for it. Kind of cool, but not what I was trying to achieve. There's some sort of reason. Try this one. That'll do the job. It's not as pretty as I was going for, but it'll do the job. Okay, cool. So you see how we're still essentially just using our CB form. Now that's come down we can either continue that note as a G against the C, or we can look for a different sound. Not there, we want it in this one. Session is not doing what I want it to do. There we go. We hold that note, we might even hold that a little longer than we feel it should. 2-2, and let's try this. Okay. So we can mix and match our parts. There shouldn't be any dramas there. So with not many sounds, we've got a kicker snare, a bass line, a semi-pitched sound, which is playing both the role of a musical instrument and a sound effect, a dark MIDI pad kind of thing. Oh, sorry, that was this one. Something that plays the role of a guitar. Not that you have to do those things. It's just that's not an uncommon thing, because a lot of the guys wanted to get the feel of guitar music in there without actually using one of those awful things with strings on it. I mean, now I'm going to take that out of there simply because we're contrasting too much with what we want here. The idea being this pad brings a kind of beauty, because if we've been pounding away at people for a period of time, and 15 to 30 seconds is plenty of time to pound away at people, then we need to show that there is something else out there. There's no point simply going, everything's fucked, everything's fucked, everything's fucked, everything's fucked, everything's fucked, without the sense of there being some way for it to be unfucked. And so this shows that. We might even decide to get rid of our bass line there. And use the material again. Waste not, want not. So turn all of these into much shorter notes. Much shorter notes indeed. But into one of those. Actually, no, we'll turn them to eighth notes. It's going to make a lot more sense. It's still allowed to be that. Now let's move that to there. Or even to there. of space. Guitar in the center. Machine up, maybe go that way. So what you see him doing there is obviously these sounds step on each other quite a lot. So with a little bit of panning, modern mixing is just going to say, oh, well, you've got a hard pan then. No, you probably don't want to do that because you're after what we're thinking of as a brutal feel. Creating something that's too wide doesn't actually sound brutal. It sounds huge and wide, but it doesn't sound muscular. I've spoken about this before. Old rap tracks sound very muscular, far more so than modern stuff. Why? Because they're almost completely in mono. There might be a few things in stereo, but they're almost completely in mono, and they sound very muscular, in great part because of that. Because there's none of this whole doolally, fairies flittering around out here kind of stuff. It's just right down the center. So you can get a more brutal sound by staying close to the center. All this mixing out here is just giving people the impression that they've got their head right inside something and they're hearing all this delicate little detail. Have your tinkles come out here? Have your reverb come out here? But things that you want to, then they want to be in the center of the space to keep them muscular. That's about it. Where you go from there, and even doing this far, is entirely up to you. As I've said, there are some things that fall into the EBM thing, like Fetus's nail, which don't have a lot to do with this sound. This is just that kind of front 242, that sound that really had settled in by about the mid-80s, when it was starting to be a little bit like, oh, that's the way it all sounds. But you can go back to the early stuff and hear this tremendous variety of interesting ideas. Do whatever you want, but if you're going, how do I get that sound? That's your starter. Obviously, if you want to have a look at the Thortfulness ReFill, would love to set you up with most of the core sounds that you will need for classic EBM. And of course, you're always welcome to ask questions. If you're looking for someone to mix or to help you develop your material, this is what I do. This is how I earn my living. So feel free to have a chat to me on that as well. You have a great day now. See you all.